Daniel, you've been living without money for 12 years, right?
Yeah, 12 years. In 2000, in the fall of 2000, I gave up my last money.
So, why did you choose that?
That's always a little difficult of a question because there's a lot of different reasons. It's something I actually thought about when I was a kid. I was raised in a fairly religious Christian household, and I often wondered why we never really kept the teachings of Jesus, So that kind of stuck in my mind as a child. And then as I got older, I was very fascinated with religion and religions, and I studied other religions when I left home and found that they were all basically saying the same thing. It's kind of the one thing they all have in common, the idea of giving up possessions and doing for the sake of doing rather than for the sake of future reward, which I feel is what money represents. And I always wanted to find the common thread, that all these cultures agree upon. I figured that's the truth. And also, I was kind of a nature freak growing up, and I would look at nature and think, wow, it's so beautiful and it's so balanced, and it functions perfectly without money. And why can't we? What is this money thing? And then also looking at politics and our world money economy, I don't really think I have to do much commentary on that. It's like, just look around, does it function well? And I felt more and more that I didn't want to take part in that. That I wanted to experiment with other ways of living. And looking back at nature again, I realized this when I was traveling in Alaska. I was backpacking and experimenting with living off the land, that basically the natural economy, the gift economy, is a pay-it-forward economy. I don't see anything bartering with even barter. Like, I wanted to get away from even barter. Like, I don't see anything trading and calculating with anything else. It's just like a bear takes a raspberry from a bush, eats it. The bush demands nothing in return. The bear has no sense of guilt, and she moves on to somewhere else, and then she poops out raspberry seeds, feeds organisms in the soil, and on top of that propagates more raspberry plants, and everybody benefits, and the raspberry plant bush gets what it needs in return eventually. In fact, it gets exactly what it needs in return right when the bear takes the berry. And there's no accountant sitting next to the raspberry bush saying, wow, now we gotta keep tabs. How's this bush gonna get paid back? And that's the idea. I feel like, and going back to our Judeo-Christian myth, I was feeling more and more, and also studying it, like studying the Hebrew and everything, I was realizing this is the idea, this is what caused our fall from what we call grace. Grace means gratis, gratitude. They all come from the same root. Grace, gift economy. It's our fall from grace. It was this consciousness of credit and debt, which I would call knowledge. The archaic term would be knowledge of good and evil. And it's when our mind entered the scene and had to control positive and negative and credit and debt, and that's when we got out of balance with nature.
So what does living without money look like, practically?
Well, first I would say again, look at nature. That's what it practically looks like. And when I first started doing this, it felt like, wow, this is something strange and new. And now it just feels like this is no big deal. It's just like, is it a big deal that that bird in the tree is living without money, or the worm in the ground. That's just the way nature functions. And I feel like it's just living without money is giving up the sense of worry. I feel like worry is contrary to the laws of nature. And it's basically trust in the laws of nature. You can call it God or universe or whatever you want, but that's what it is. It's living in faith that everything we need comes as we need it, just as it works in the infinite universe. And we've lost touch with that. So it's basically regaining the sense that wherever we are, we're at home, because the whole universe is our home.
What about things like food, accommodation, traveling, health? Would you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, for food, of course I've experimented with living off the land, but I wanted to bring this idea within the walls of civilization too. I feel like it does no good when we're cloistered away, and I felt like I want to experiment with gift economy within human society. And just like nature, like be a hunter-gatherer within and without civilization. So I decided I would take only what's freely thrown away and freely given out of people's generosity. So I get a lot of food from dumpsters. We have so much waste in this society, and people's generosity. And I also forage, both wild and I glean from people's fields sometimes when I'm hitchhiking. And as far as shelter goes, I primarily camp out. I have 2 camps, one near town with a tent that I found in the dumpster, and the other one, which is my main one, is a cave up the canyon. And sometimes people ask me to house sit, so I'll do that. And then when I'm on the road, I usually carry a tarp, and I camp with a tarp and a sleeping bag. Oh yeah, and health. That question always comes up. Like, people are always asking me. That seems to be really high in people's minds. Like, what do you do about health? And a lot of people are worried about that. But again, this got me thinking. I used to work in a hospital back in my money days. I was a lab assistant, and I would draw blood all over the hospital, and I'd go into the geriatric ward, and I would see people with tubes in their arms, old people, and I felt like they didn't want to be alive, their families didn't want them to be alive, but we kept them alive for some reason. And then I would think of I once saw this documentary. It was a really old documentary about Inuits, Eskimos. And this old woman, she was losing her teeth, and she decided, I'm not useful to this society anymore, and I'm going to go die. So she went out and she sat in the lotus position on a slab of ice till she froze to death, and a polar bear came and got her. And we look at that and we think, we automatically think, well, that's barbaric. We've advanced so far since then. But when I was in that geriatric ward watching people with tubes in their arms living miserably, I thought, and then I think about populations of chimpanzees. That are we better off than a chimpanzee? And then when I look at nature again, look at any wild herd of deer, and I'm talking wild animals, not domestic ones. Herds of deer, antelope, bears. How often do we see chronic illnesses? how often do we see malnutrition and obesity? And then I look at this wonderful system we've set up, just look around, and the intense human suffering and illnesses, even with our greatest physicians, our technology. I think, are we any better off than a chimpanzee? And I thought, I want to experiment with just trusting nature and natural selection. We call natural selection cruel, but I think what really is cruelty? It's like, I feel like nature abhors prolonged suffering. It does not allow it. It knocks you off if you've got something chronic, but we somehow perpetuate that. It's like we live day after day, year after year, our whole lives under prolonged suffering, and that I would call cruelty. And so I decided natural selection is also, I would call it God, the laws of chance. I would call the mind of God, and I will put my faith in that. And if it means I die early in a canyon with a broken leg, so be it. I wouldn't be the first creature to die. Like, we somehow think that death is this horrible, ominous thing, but every one of us have to do it, and we've been doing it for zillions of years, and why all the drama now? But also, this is about trusting in what is natural within us too, and it is natural for us to help each other. When we see somebody suffering, we assist them. And I decided I will take medical aid if it's freely given. I don't want to take aid that's paid for, if it comes from someone's heart, whether it's a professional or a friend. And I just feel like it'll all work out with that, both natural selection and human compassion.
Obviously it worked out for 12 years.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about the challenges you had? What did you have to overcome to be able to practice this kind of living?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I thought about what really are the challenges. I used to work in homeless shelters, did social work in Denver and Boulder, and the idea of being homeless terrified me. And I saw that there was just a fine line between me and them. And I was dealing with clinical depression, and I thought, wow, something could snap and I could be on the other side of this line. And as time went, I thought about it more. I thought, well, what is it that really terrifies me about being homeless? And I thought, it's not really the physical reality of it. It's the mental part. It's like, because I enjoy going out and camping. I like putting my body to challenges, and it's exhilarating. So I thought, well, what really is it? And I thought about people in the shelter. A lot of them had a very low self-esteem, and it felt like the whole system was set up to